Hi, it's Chris Watkin here, and I'm with Andy Soloman from Yonder, and today's Monday the 6th of July 2020, and Andy is responsible for the live chat and other web services for over a quarter of UK estate agents, and you have a particular insight into what's been happening during lockdown and post-lockdown, which is absolutely fascinating. So welcome for joining me today, Andy.
Thank you, Chris. It's very nice to be here again.
Always a pleasure to see you, mate. What's been happening in the property market from your point of view with Yonder? Because you do an awful lot of work with estate agents with regard to booking viewings, booking valuations, booking landlord leads, which it's all very good looking at the back end stuff. You're looking at the front end, so you've got your finger on the pulse. So from your point of view, talk to me about going into lockdown, what was happening in the market during lockdown, and what you've been learning post-lockdown in the 6 weeks or so since we've come out.
That's a huge question, Chris, because we've got more than 3 months now of absolutely unique circumstances that probably none of us have ever experienced. And I split the very beginning into two stages. There was the stage before the official lockdown, when there was a lack of clarity, I suppose, in the official announcements and the guidance from the government. And that week before, it was what I call sort of headless chicken week. People weren't really clear what was going to happen. They didn't know how they needed to behave. One thing they knew for sure was that the outlook was very, very bleak. Their cash flow potential was looking very, very bleak. Business in the pipeline, they didn't know whether that was going to be able to go through or not. Go forward a week, and then we got to the sky is falling in. The world is ending. The world as we know it is ending. And sheer panic hit. And for us at Yonder as a supplier, as much as for any of the clients and the estate agents and other businesses that we work with, of course, we're all faced with the same dilemma. You know, what's going to happen? What's the consequence of this actually going to be? And we were faced initially with a lot of our clients coming to us asking to cancel because they were looking to protect the money they had in their bank. They didn't know, what was coming next. We very quickly moved to try to offer support to as many of our businesses as we could, because as a supplier, we need our clients to be successful. Without our clients, we don't have a business either. So we firstly gave people the option to pause their relationship with us, commercial relationship, as opposed to actually cancel. And then on the 23rd of March, as lockdown was actually announced, we applied a 25% across the board discount to all of our clients, new and existing, to say, we're here, we'll do as much as we possibly can to help. We're not a software service, we're a people service, we've got salaries to pay. That 25% sounds great, but actually it was a quarter of our revenue that we gave away in one fell swoop, like that. Which also, for us as a business, we didn't know what was going to happen. But one thing, in my previous experience, I used to be a journalist, and in 2001, I was the bureau chief for Reuters in Karachi in Pakistan when 9/11 happened. And I remember sitting in that office and watching the second plane hit the towers, or the tower that it hit, and thinking, right, that's it. It's all coming to us now. And meanwhile, the whole world was going, the world is ending. This is beyond comprehension, the consequences. And I knew it was coming exactly to where we were. Now, through that period, I learned an awful lot about how to manage both your own well-being and your family's well-being and your colleagues' well-being, because I was responsible for quite a large team of people, but also that eventually things are going to settle. It's not all going to disappear. Life will have to carry on some way or another. And without dwelling too much on that particular experience, I was able to look to draw parallels from that disaster, that utter disaster, into what do we do next. So that kind of sets the scene. I won't go into any more detail than that really, but then over the next few weeks, that last week of March, the first half of April, the volumes of inquiries that estate agents were receiving fell massively. The volumes of people engaging on estate agency websites fell massively. In fact, in those first few weeks of lockdown, we looked at the top, or the biggest agents that we worked with to get try to get a sort of an indication of what was actually happening on these websites. And we saw very quickly that the numbers of people visiting estate agency websites fell by between 35 and 50%. Now you can say there's a number of reasons why that could have happened. Firstly, a lot of them wound in their that digital marketing, so pay-per-click disappeared, so some of that traffic disappeared. But what you actually saw really was the people who were just the casual browsers, the people who like going in and looking at pictures of pretty houses, they disappeared. And what you were left with were people who actually had a need. And as we looked at some of the conversations, and so we are managing way over 1 million chats on behalf of estate agents a year now, and so we get that. You mentioned finger on the pulse, and exactly what it is. It's the sentiment. It's hearing what questions people are asking.
So because you do the online chatty thing, and do you do answer service as well, or?
We do some voice, but the majority of what we do is the managed live chat. So this is our staff are sitting behind the websites as an extension of the estate agents team. They're very well trained, they're property experts. We've been doing this now for 6 years, and there's hardly a question in property that we haven't heard.
So if you think about it, you're some form of extension of an estate agent, but you've actually got written proof because people are actually typing the right questions. So you know exactly what's happening. In fact, you probably know more what's happening in an estate agent than the bosses themselves. So we're in week 1, week 2. What sort of conversations were being had?
People were worried. They were like us all. They were worried. They were worried. Can I? Will it be possible? What happens now? I'm in a chain. Is it going to? There were all kinds of things that were coming through. We weren't getting so many of the can you come and value my house? That element disappeared pretty much overnight, but only for a short period of time. Interestingly. And if you think back to last year, in fact, you think back the last 3 years, essentially since the Brexit vote back in 2016, we've lived in some quite uncertain economic and political times. And last year, specifically, was a real mess politically throughout the year. The back end of last year, you had all the heavyweight political shenanigans leading up to the general election, tying in with the seasonal downturn and new inquiries anyway. So we always see it tailing off in November, December, but last year, boom. And so if people have been holding back because of the uncertainty in terms of their moving plans, elections out the way, the so-called Boris bounce, whether it was or just the natural seasonal uplift that you get at the beginning of the year, but we sense that people were thinking, right, I've held off long enough now.
Sod it.
Now's the time. Spring is coming. All of that stuff is resolved to one degree or another. We still don't quite know what's going to happen, but at least it's kind of resolved. And so now we're going to get ready to move. And so the inquiry levels in January and February were really strong. But as February went on, as we got to the end of February, it started to slow down a little bit when people were obviously wising up to what was happening in the rest of the world, especially out in Asia. And then by the time March came, it started to slow down further, and of course then it fell off a cliff on the weekend before the 23rd of March, when the lockdown was around the corner. Now, that drop off in web traffic, we looked at something like 30 million web visits going back to the beginning of 2019, and it showed this massive, just everything, all the indicators went south. Just
like dropping off a cliff.
Absolutely dropping off a cliff. But within probably 2 weeks, we started to hear signs of life from the market.
Like those conversations you said a few minutes ago, but people were worried. But were you actually seeing positive stuff as well?
Yes, absolutely, especially in the rental market.
Really?
And
so it was early April, you saw some...
It's early April, yeah.
Okay.
So at that time, we thought, okay, so we've got all this data coming in. It's anecdotal, it's sentiment, it's finger on the pulse stuff. It's really interesting.
It's fantastic
It's
stuff.
because right, because you can wait weeks to get the real data, what's actually happening. But if you
it takes months.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you know your stats. You're a statistician, so you know this stuff. And so we felt we were in quite a privileged position.
I think you were in a unique position. There's not many people in the UK that had the amount of data that you had.
No.
And it isn't just like property prices, because again, that's just an outcome. This is actual front end stuff.
Absolutely, right at the front. And so we looked at the data, and I looked at the data and I thought, okay, so there's something really interesting here going on, and if we track this, so we launched the Yonder Property Sentiment Tracker, which the goal there was, it wouldn't stand up to hard-line statistical scrutiny, because this is just anecdotal. This is what people are saying, and we measured the numbers of new business inquiries that we were capturing across the 4 broad spectrums of vendor, buyer, landlord, and tenant. And so to begin with, everything was rock bottom, but we also then stuck our heads up above the parapet and we released this.
Mm.
So we've now been running that for, I think this week will be 13 weeks. First 2 weeks that we ran it, it got some publicity and people noticed it, but also had some naysayers. And I remember being on a webinar. We've all been on lots of webinars, right? There was someone from a data service. I won't mention the name of the data service, but he was, so I can tell you, Andy, that all of our figures are 90% off. Everything's just disappeared. Nothing's going on. It's dead.
I suppose, but if you're measuring, deals tied up, if you're measuring property sold, it is going to be off. It's going to be that. But
absolutely.
But that's an outcome. You need this stuff up front.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fascinating. But we stuck to our guns.
Yes.
My head in particular was up above the parapet, and I got shot from a few directions by some people. But also, a lot of people came and said, "This is really interesting. What's this actually telling us?" And as time went on, just to short circuit that bit of the conversation, the guy from the data service, as we went forward a month and then 2 months, we started to see what we'd been saying first starting to materialise into viewings and listings and rental tenant moves and all of the rest of it. And so I felt actually quite good about that, because we took a real punt that Yonder putting this stuff out. But what the data showed us was that, first off, tenants. Now there were a few areas there that were of particular interest. One was maybe leases, or the contracts were coming up. Another one might be around affordability. Another one might be around changing working circumstances. So there were people who needed to move for whatever reason.
So not necessarily new business, but or people had to move, not like to move.
People had to move, yeah. But then we also saw, especially from some of our London clients, indications that there were tenants who were actually thinking this might be a good time to move, because they were thinking that, well, this is, if we're going to get a good deal, maybe now is the time, if there are these properties without people in them, or whatever reason. So the tenant inquiry. So by the time we got into May, so this is 5 weeks on. Tenant inquiries, so before the first relaxation, so still in lockdown, new tenant inquiries saying, I need to move, I'm interested in this property, or I need help finding somewhere. They were 150% above the average level that had gone all the way back to the very beginning of 2019. And the others were catching up.
And we hadn't, government, because it was around towards the end of May that they let things go. Really,
middle of May there was some relaxation. It was just astonishing, just off the scale. Okay. So then you're asking the question, okay, so how much of this is actually would have happened anyway? How much of this is new demand that's come in? What's driving it? And then you start to look at the other indicators. The buyers started to rise, and the vendors started to follow, and they started to track, and started to go higher and higher and higher and higher. Meanwhile, I would be speaking to estate agents, and some of them were pull the shutters, close the doors, turn the key, turn the lights out, and they were kind of heads down, waiting for everything to pass. Others had furloughed all their staff, but realised there was loads of stuff that they needed to do, and they couldn't cope. And others were using it as an opportunity to think and review how they set up their business now they were operating as things were likely to ease. Of course, all of them faced with the same challenge around management of cash flow, but there were various grants and things like that available to them, that the wise ones.
So we got the release middle week, end of week 2 at week 3 of May. What happened to the figures then?
They carried on going up. It's carried on going up as the relaxation came. So we go forward to the when the estate agents were officially allowed to go back to work. The spikes just went through the roof.
I've seen the graphs. I mean, most people have. I'm surprised you need an extra piece of paper for.
You do, absolutely, you do. Of course, there was still all of the challenges to get any of that stuff done. There were the health and safety considerations, both the staff and customers. There are the problems actually getting the searches, getting the local authorities to do the stuff they need to do, whether the solicitors are actually working or not. Mortgage lending, obviously, more recently has become a bit tighter on the 90 or 95% loan to value side of things.
They're still out there, though.
Still out there, still there. But more and more people were finding ways to do things. But within this, there's another trend. There's another really important thing to mention here. And I think for all of us, as human beings living in this coronavirus time, we've had to adapt our behaviour. We've had to look to do different things in different ways, new things in different ways. We've had to look to do old things in different ways because we just basically can't just go out and do them. And online is the thing that's just boomed. I mean, you hear about the boom in online retail, and actually some businesses that have thrived in this because they have transformed themselves rapidly to deliver a service online. And I mentioned just now that the website traffic fell 35-50%, and that stayed down there until the middle of May. And late May it started to rise. In June it went recovered further. So by the time we got into the middle of June, it was actually 40% above the average level. But all the way through, so when we hit the bottom of the web visit number, so the absolute number of unique individuals coming onto these estate agency websites.
Their agents' websites, not Rightmove.
No, not Rightmove. Estate agency websites. They were choosing to use live chat in a higher volume than we've ever seen. And in the 6 years of running this business, it was just, we would normally only engage with a very small minority of the people, but those people are quite motivated because, you know, if with a targeted deployment, you're looking at user journeys. And
well, who would have dreamed that you could do meetings over video calls with Zoom?
That's right. Yeah,
you'd have been laughed at back end of last year, wouldn't you?
That's right. That's absolutely right. So people have adopted the technology that's available to them, and they're all carrying their phone, and they're you know, the majority of interactions that we manage are taking place on a mobile phone. It's not really a phone anymore, is it? Let's face it. It's a multifaceted device of some description, or multiple descriptions. But we moved from, on average, engaging with 1.5% to 2% of website users, which sounds like a really small number, but that number on its own will convert at around about 1/3 to 40% of those people will convert to a new business lead, which in turn typically relates to about a 50% uplift in conversion on the estate agent's website. It's a really like that. It is, and I'm not just saying that because I'm biased, I'm saying that because that's what the data says. Come into lockdown, website traffic dived, number of people engaging in chat went the other way. So all the way through, you had...
So the quantity went down, but the quality went up.
Quality and
or what was left was quality.
The quantity, well, the volume of web visitors went down. The quantity of people engaging in live chat went up, and the number of leads that were being generated went up. We generated more leads in that period than we've ever generated before. It was. We were looking at this, scratching our heads. So you have this. If you look back to the beginning of 2019,
and what do you classify as a lead? A free val lead, landlord lead, tenant lead?
An actionable new business opportunity. So that's either. It's something, you know, it's someone wanting a valuation, be it lettings or sales, a buyer inquiring about a property, or a tenant inquiring about a property. Obviously, there's different values attached to those leads, but these are actionable things that the businesses need to actually deal with. And all the way back, if you go back, so we tracked all the data back to January 2019, beginning of last year, and web visits and number of live chats managed and number of leads all moved in sync with each other. They trended perfectly until 2 weeks into lockdown. And then you've got this widening jaw. And so now you have this situation where live chat adoption has grown massively. The website visits has recovered. So last week's, the most recent data shows that web visit numbers are 24% up on the average, going back to the beginning of 2019.
So that's last week in June?
Last week in June, yes, that's correct. And but for 2 weeks before that, they were at 40% over.
Okay. What about the number of new business opportunities coming about through live chat?
Off the scale.
Still?
Yeah. So that widening jaw, it's narrowed a little bit, but it hasn't. If the web visits have gone from 35 to 50% below the average to 40% 2 weeks ago and now 24% now, you would expect that if things were going to return to normal, that the lines of the number of people engaging in live chat and the number of leads being generated by live chat would come back together again.
Mm.
No.
They've remained high.
They've remained much higher. And there's a number of reasons for this, I think. One is the convenience of digital. It's there. It doesn't involve any risk. It's a naturally socially distanced way of communicating. But on another level, if anyone's been trying to make phone calls through lockdown to whoever it is, if they'd booked a holiday and they were trying to get a refund, on hold for 8 hours and then get automatically chopped off. Tried to get through to an estate agent. I mean, how many estate agents didn't have telephone systems that were suitable to poll through to home workers? So those calls were just being lost. Emails going unanswered, furloughed staff, so no one actually to do this stuff. So the consumer's expectation over what kind of response they're likely to get was so low that when they're online and they can come onto a website where we're working, they'll get a response in 15 seconds. Super quick. And then we will have all the information that they need in order to...
So do you think that this could be the start where, I hate to say it, but there'll be less reliance on negs and more reliance on services like your own and money pennies who are more telephone based?
Well, I think there's a broader subject there, to be honest. I think I'm a business owner, and a lot of the audience that if anyone watches this, are going to be business owners. And one of the many things that this period has enabled us to do is to look at our businesses, look at how we've been operating. And I say to people like myself, the business has actually built up a bit of middle-aged fat because we've just kind of naturally kind of grown. We've added bits in and here and there and everywhere. And then actually, when you step back and you drill down into what you've actually got, you try to work out, well, what do I need? Is this the most efficient way of doing it? Look how well that's working in this remarkable period. I will say, at Yonder, I'm amazed, and my team has been incredible. We have had 100% uptime. We have not had 1 minute when we haven't been delivering our service throughout this entire period.
Putting aside the numbers, which are very important, you must be interacting with an awful lot of estate agency bosses during lockdown. Talk to me about the good, the bad and the ugly. What have you been noticing? And please don't mention any names, but... No,
not going to mention any names.
You must, like myself, I talk to an awful lot of people. What have you noticed? Let's look at during lockdown first.
So, during lockdown, they fell into two broad camps. There was the one that went, I've got to take all the costs out of my business, strip everything out, and wait for this to get better, or find a way to deal with what I've got to do without all of these other things that I use. And you've got the other one over on the other side was thinking, well, I've got the opportunity to take a lot of costs out of my business, furloughing being obviously one of the main ways to do that, and to bring in some support through the various grants and other things and business interruption loans and all those things. But also then taking a critical eye to the things that I need to keep, because I've got to keep the wheels turning. It might not be possible to do certain things now.
What proportion between the two, roughly?
It's hard for me to say, because I would obviously be very loyal to the people that work with us, but I would say that the type of business that typically works with Yonder is a bit more kind of forward thinking than
to have a web chat on their website, fair goes.
and other things that they do, in terms of thinking about changed consumer behaviour. Not talking about changing consumer behaviour anymore, changed consumer behaviour, and thinking about how traditional estate agency services and the high street agent values that they bring to a transaction. I've got absolutely nothing to do with being online or being in the high street. It's all about how you serve the customer. And if the customer is online first, which they have been for some years now, but no more so than now is absolutely critical. The time for digital transformation is gone. Actually,
should already be transformed.
Should already be. If you weren't fully functioning at the time of lockdown, during lockdown, you should have got yourself to the point where you are.
So come back to the agents that work, the good ones. Talk to me about what the good and bad ones were doing during lockdown then. Bad
is probably a wrong word, because a lot of it was well intentioned.
Do you think it was fear?
Do
you think it was fear?
There was an awful lot of fear. And again, actually, that going back to my experience back in 9/11, that fear of that everything's gone to shit. Everything's just not. So it's understanding how to spend a good penny and a bad penny. Understanding the things that you need to keep going. So I didn't know what was going to happen to my business, but what I found quite quickly was how important we became to some of our
How did
clients.
you cope personally?
That's a really interesting question, because mental health and mental well-being issues are things which are important to me. Actually, I've experienced some tough things in the past, and I've got friends who suffer from PTSD. Journalists, actually, foreign correspondents, war correspondents, and these kind of people. They're really, really messed up as a consequence of it. I personally, the way I deal with it is I throw myself into it. It's compulsive behaviour. I am just absorbed by the whole thing. It's the challenge. So I think I did all right, and I think myself and my business partner together, even though we didn't see each other for a couple of months, I think we did all right, and we.
But sometimes throwing yourself in can actually be the detriment of your family.
Yes, it can, and but I was working from home and I wasn't travelling. So I was there for my family, but I've been working incredibly long hours, like all of us. And the longer it goes on, actually, the harder it becomes.
And how did you cope?
If I'm speaking really frankly and really openly, I had some wobbles along the way, certainly. And I think if anyone was to say as a business owner that you didn't have wobbles, then I wouldn't believe.
And how did you get over those wobbles?
By recognising I was having them. In my personal life, it was my wife and myself. My two sons are, one's 25 and one's 22. So the 25-year-old actually works as an economist in London, but he came home in the middle of March and was working from home. We left his flat in Earls Court. It took him back there yesterday, actually. He was moved back yesterday. So he's been at home for 4 months. And the other son had just finished his degree. So we had a house full, and I got quite stressed at times, and I did explode once in the kitchen, which I regretted immediately that I did it. I think I was looking for, at that point, I was looking for a bit of sympathy or understanding that, I was fighting a battle, an invisible battle, and I needed to win it. I couldn't afford to lose it.
Well, how many people do you employ in Yonder?
It was about 20 in the UK. Currently, it's 21 or 22.
And abroad?
Close to 100, just over 100.
So you're paying the mortgage of 100 on the rents of 120 people on your shoulders.
I'm keeping far more than that alive. The livelihoods are far more than that, and that's a big responsibility. It's something I've always taken as seriously.
Do you think an awful lot of estate agency bosses felt that pain, that they had the responsibility of their staff on their shoulders?
Some certainly told me they did. Absolutely. I found myself getting closer to more people in this period than I've ever done before, actually, in a really concentrated way. And some of the conversations that I would have with people would take quite unexpected directions, because you start to share your some very personal things, which in a business relationship normally you don't. You might go and have a pint with those that you know reasonably well, but to know intimate details about what's going on in their families, going on in themselves, and their fears and that kind of stuff. So a lot of that stuff was coming out. I actually naturally find it quite difficult to talk personally about those things as to how it impacts me. But I don't mind listening to others talk about it, and I will talk to them about it. But you asking me these questions, and there was one conversation I had actually about a month or so ago with someone, which I came out of feeling, that was actually quite good. That was quite therapeutic, because there's not about failure here, and that's a hard thing for people to get over. Yeah,
especially estate agents. You're not there like.
Oh, they're the salt of the earth, Chris.
Do you think you're a better person coming out of this?
Oh, what a question. Am I a better person? Well, firstly, I don't think I am out of it yet.
Okay.
I think when I saw, obviously, this go out over a period of time. But when I saw the video of people in Soho on Saturday night after the pubs all reopened in London, I was just thinking, you bloody idiot. What are you doing? And I am concerned that we will be facing more serious problems just down the line, because it hasn't gone through the population yet, and we are faced with all kinds of challenges ahead. One thing I will just add back to the data, and I'm not trying to change the subject here.
No, we're coming back to later, don't we?
But just on the data, we had the people who had their stalled plans, but then as you went through lockdown, you start to have, we believe, start to have people who had been thinking about doing it later, and so instead try to bring their plans forward because here's a window of opportunity, and the message there is, make hay while the sun shines. And yes, I think a lot of agents have been doing that.
I think there's a lot of people that are seeing the silver lining, but not the cloud behind it.
Yeah.
At the moment.
The storm clouds are there, very much so.
I mean, there's an awful lot of negs and valid, especially negs out there who are on furlough, which I don't think will be coming back to the business.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very, very harsh reality. There's unemployment generally, and the recession generally is going to be really bad as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, if we do have high unemployment, it will affect the property market.
Yes.
And the simple fact is that property values will be affected, but estate agents shouldn't be worried about property values. It's all about transactions and
Absolutely
getting
right.
your slice of the pie. So it doesn't really matter if property values drop 10, 15%.
Yeah.
Your job is to sell the house, and you earn the money on what the sale is.
If people need to sell, if people need to move,
and people will need to move.
If their affordability changes on, these are there is going to be some incredibly. You asked me about thinking about staff and their welfare and all of that kind of thing. But at the same time, as a business owner, sometimes you get to a point where you can't look after everyone. You can only look after some of them. And so those tough decisions, some really hard decisions, they need to be made for the greater good. Because if you delay or deny the reality, the harsh reality of that, all you're actually doing is damaging it for everyone. These decisions have to be made. And a lot of businesses will realise, and I think estate agencies are a prime candidate for this, that there are so many ways of doing things more efficiently. Having a network of branches, no matter whether you're a small or a large agent, but having a network of branches where there's a huge amount of replication of activity in each branch.
I mean, putting aside the personalities of Paul Smith and Hart, you've got to admit their plan of setting up hubs and working, 2 or 3 branches going into one is, I hate to say, it's quite clever.
Yeah, it's inevitable, actually. These are among the tough decisions. I mean, the offices, expensive high street offices, and some people won't like me saying this, but expensive high street offices have been a vanity thing for quite some time now.
I mean, if you were setting an estate agent tomorrow, would you run it from a high street agency?
Probably not. I see the success of not all of them, some of the brands that have made a model out of not having a high street estate. So YouMove being one example. That's a brand I know very well, and within the YouMove network, there are some extraordinarily successful agents there who don't and never have an office.
My opinion when it comes to high street is that having a high street office doesn't mean that you will be successful, and not having a high street office doesn't mean you won't be successful. Fundamentally, if you are going to have a high street agency, you use that high street to your advantage, and not just use it as basically an office space with a piece of glass on the high street that people only walk into Greg's.
Yes.
God, I do miss my Greg's sausage rolls.
I sort of went past a Greg's today on the way here, and I thought, shall I? No, later. No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the absolute inalienable truth here is that property is a local business, right? If you want to offer a high value service, you need to know your market. You need to know the community. You need to be known by the community. Do you need to have a glitzy, expensive office?
Well, people's eyeballs are on mobile phones now.
Actually, that's really interesting.
It's the remote control to people's lives.
Yeah, Well, one of the things we did actually during lockdown, one of the very first things we did, even before lockdown fully came, the week before, was we saw that the lockdown was coming. We saw that offices were going to inevitably have to be closed. And so we distributed window flyers with QR codes to most of our clients. So they could then put these in their window, and then straight from the high street, straight into chat, straight into a connection with the agent, or us in this instance, to bridge that divide. And I looked around in my area how different agents handled the fact that they were closed. And there's one, I won't name the brand. They're not a client, but it doesn't really matter. But their branch, they're one of 3 estate agents in quite a short space of space, on the way to the Sainsbury's supermarket, the local Sainsbury's supermarket on the high street. So the footfall there was going to continue throughout lockdown because people would have to go to the supermarket. They took in their windows, their double-fronted window, in their windows they removed all of the property details. There was not one photograph of a house in their 2 windows.
So what did they put in their
thank you to the NHS across everything, absolutely everything. And you can't fault the sentiment, and I'm a huge supporter of the NHS. Has always served my family and people dear to me very, very well, and I cherish it massively. But I think they really missed a trick, because they could still make the same statement, and all of their boards had a rainbow and thank you to our NHS, and there's around that, which is all also a nice touch. But when you stood outside their office, there was nothing to indicate they were an estate agent. Nothing at all. Just the name across the top. You had to know that was an estate agent because it didn't say estate agents on it. And I couldn't understand it's like this is we're closed. You'll see no houses here. Keep moving. You see no houses here.
What are the good ones doing?
I think the good ones have been reviewing their business practices, viewing how they can do more things remotely. And actually that's another really interesting thing that's come through the data. So from a standing start before lockdown, there were the number of people who specifically requested some kind of video solution in relation to the house transaction, the property transaction, was negligible. It may as well just be 0, just a fat 0. By the time we got to the 3rd week of May, 13% of all people indicating that they were interested in selling a property, and 12% of all people interested in buying a property were specifically requesting video solutions, virtual viewings and virtual valuations. And there's clearly there's also a big learning curve that the consumer has to go through in terms of what does this actually mean, how reliable is it, and interesting to say that there was the story about TPO and potential for rising complaints around virtual viewings, etc., misrepresentation possibly, and those kinds of things. But very early on, I started to hear from some of the best agents about how they were transacting using video. One of the agents we work with down in Devon, they told me that they very successfully gave a viewing with I think it was an 82-year-old vendor, buyer, and the agent, all remotely, 3-way on a video call, and the 82-year-old showed the buyer around the property, and an offer was then forthcoming. Now, obviously, buying a property without actually physically viewing it is unlikely to be common for an awfully long time to come. But the fact of the matter is there were consumers who were willing to embrace this technology, and vendors who were willing to embrace the technology. And some people going forward are going to continue to be or feel unsafe about, there's going to be probably a polarisation of society. Those that, sort of, let's get going, let's go and have a pint, go and see your mates, hey, how you doing? And then there are, unlike our socially distanced interview here, of course, and then there are those that are going, I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. But those people need an entry point into the market as well. They need the right support.
What else do you think will change going forward?
I think there'll be a big rationalisation of staffing, as we've touched on. I think there will be inevitably they will have to close offices. You can still be local without being on the high street. My advice would be that look at what you're spending out on your rent and all the rest of it. Each month and see where you can make some savings without damaging your reach and your profile within your local communities. But there are lots and lots of ways to stay relevant in your local community, and I'll tell you a story about one agent that really impresses me in a second. But reinvest that money. Don't just reinvest some of that money, not even all of it actually. Reinvest some of that money in sorting out your digital side. Get yourself a mobile website. Not a website that works on mobile first, because that's where most people are. It can then work on the other things as well. Look at the different suppliers that are there. Outsource where possible, because that will bring in massive cost saves and efficiencies and enable you to focus in on the core business of transacting property. Let other people do some of these other things which you don't need to spend. One of the things with Livechat is that people say, well, the key objection is how do I know I can trust you to represent my business in the way that I would myself? And my honest answer is, well, actually, we will do it better. Because if you're sitting in an office and you're doing your live chat, you recognise you want live chat on your website, and you should have it, whether you do it yourself or use someone else or Yonder or whoever. You will always struggle to deal with those people on live chat in the way they need to be dealt with, because we're dealing in micro moments of like 15 seconds. It's an attention span that's half that of a goldfish these days online. You're fighting for that attention all of the time. Like loyalty, you don't earn loyalty once and keep it forever. You've got to continually earn it, continually earn it, continually earn it. And so if you've got someone sitting in the office there doing their live, trying to do the live chat themselves, maybe being a bit slow, the phone rings, they go, and someone walks in, maybe. But then I just ask a simple question to a business owner. So, what's your hourly rate? Yeah, the average length of a live chat that we will handle for a lead will be 12 to 14 minutes. So what's your hourly rate? How much do you know? Oh, I'm very valuable. Okay, so how much is 15 minutes of your time worth? It's far more than you would pay someone else to do it. You could use that 15 minutes to go and do the business.
Too right.
Make a phone call to go to a vendor and close that deal. Get that offer in, whatever it may be.
Tell me about this story.
The good agent. Well, this is. I won't. Again, I'm not going to name anyone in this. I think today, but essentially, this is a couple who worked for a major agent in Sussex, and they broke out on their own with one of the brands that are out there.
The self-employed brands.
Yeah, self-employed brands. Yes, that's right. And to begin with, they were working in the town that's probably 7 miles or so from the village where they live. Okay, and so they thought, well, we know that market, so we should just do it there. Then someone says, no, if you're really going to make a deal of this, really going to get this working, you've got to go the full hog here. You've got to go and you've got to work in your village where you live. Because then you've got nowhere to hide, you've got no one to blame. Your success is your own, your failure is your own. And they're a young couple. They've got a couple of kids and the local schools. So that, and they in the last they've just done. I think just reached their second anniversary. They're the highest performing couple in their business in that umbrella group, and their reach has now gone way beyond the village where they started. Now, yesterday I was driving probably 12 miles from the village, and there was one of their boards was sold on it. And you see it all over the place. They have no high street office, obviously. They have no significant web traffic. But what they've done is the husband is the one that goes out and does all the negotiating and the valuations and all that kind of stuff. And his wife, she is just, she's everywhere in the community. She's across all of the Facebook groups. She's doing charity things. Her kids were, raising money for the local fire station. I mean, they're just, she's just done a thing where she on the very clever on one of the local Facebook groups. She put up some posts saying, we've all been out clapping for the NHS and our key workers and our carers and all this kind of stuff every week. But there are all these other people in our community who have been going over and above or continuing to do stuff, from Johnny or Paula in Sainsbury's to the local DFS delivery guy, or the DFS, no, it's a furniture shop, whatever they're called.
DHL.
Yeah, one of the Ds anyway. Or the guy who goes around picking up the litter, the bin men, all these people. So she started asking for nominations for who deserves a prize, who deserves recognition, to say thank you for the work they've been doing, and this engaged the whole community. Mm-hmm. And people would come in, oh, there's so and so, she's got the florist, but she's actually been sending out these flowers to people, and and there's all these other things. So suddenly they get this big sort of pot of contenders, and she self-financed all the little gifts and things, little sort of hampers and this kind of stuff that was sent out to people. But what a brilliant thing! It had nothing to do about a estate agency.
Nothing at all. Nothing
whatsoever. But if anyone asks, if anyone asks about those sides, knows, oh, that's her over there.
I think that's important, and let's start to bring this interview to a conclusion. That if you want to be a successful estate agent, you have to embrace technology.
Yes.
You have to look at your own business, and you have to be relevant and interesting to your community, so people are attracted to you. And that's not because you're an estate agent or you sell so many houses or you've got the biggest market share graph. It's being interesting and relevant to your community, so people, whenever the subject of property comes up, it's you, isn't it?
Exactly right. I mean, it's a local business, and local business doesn't mean having a glitzy office. Local business just means present in your community.
Well, people's eyeballs are on mobile phones. Let's give it, but again, don't start putting adverts out saying, "Hi, we're an estate agent, come and use us," and while market share is this big, people don't care.
They don't care at all. They need to know that they're in safe hands. Obviously, once they get to that point, because this is a really big, important transaction, carries loads of emotional baggage and other things with it as well. And we are in extraordinary times, but it seems wrong to sort of say there's some huge opportunities out there, but it's not wrong.
It isn't wrong. At the end of the day,
it's not wrong.
It's not wrong. Is there anything finally you would like to say before we close this interview?
We're not out of the woods yet, Chris. In this, let's be real. Let's be realistic. And my view is that we're not out of the woods. We've got an awfully long way to go. Businesses need to prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And the worst means potential for another complete lockdown, whether it's a local lockdown, national lockdown, whether it's more travel bans, or just the virus just going rampant through whatever. Prepare for the worst. So that means don't start loading loads of costs back into your business. Be really efficient. Take guidance from people. Work with partners who can help you do things. That means you're not, front loading the cost onto yourself. If you're thinking about going and decorating your office right now, don't. Instead of a pot of paint, go and buy some Facebook advertising or something,
Or you can paint it yourself if you have to.
Yeah. And actually, one other thing I will say is that when you're looking at suppliers and outsourcing in general, you don't need to, there's that one over there and that one over there and there's shiny things here and there. There are people, and I'd like to include myself in one of as one of them, and I think you're one of them as well, who are prepared to advise, but also how we collaborate together to create a series of solutions that link up, as opposed to being a disparate thing here, there and there, which gives you a great big pile of invoices at the end of the month. What you need is something which is looking at the workflow, your workflow, which is probably changing drastically, and if it isn't, it should, certainly. And then look at the customer journeys. How are people interacting with you? And once they start to interact with you, how are you able to interact with them? And how is the various stages of that then managed all the way through? The idea that the acquisition of an inquiry is just the beginning of a conversation. And that conversation with that person, via whatever channel it may be, via whatever activity it may be, needs to then continue throughout not just the life cycle of that transaction, but the life cycle of that person. All the time that they are there in your world, you should be engaging with them going forward for years to come.
Be less transactional and more relationship-based estate agency.
Absolutely spot on. It's all about people.
Of course it is.
The customer is in control in ways they've never been in control before. And if you try to dictate to the customer what they should have, they will just go somewhere else.
Thank you for your time today, Andy.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.